Welcome to History 300, the origins of the First World War. Lecture 12, Franz Ferdinand. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria, Prince of Hungary and Bohemia, and from 1889 until his untimely death on June the 28th, 1914, heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian imperial throne, was born in Graz in Austria on the 18th of December, 1863. He was the eldest son of Archduke Karl Ludwig of Austria, the younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph. Franz Ferdinand would not, in ordinary circumstances, have ever been heir to the Austrian throne. But in 1889, when he was just 25, Franz Josef's only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, committed suicide at his hunting lodge in Meiling. Archduke Karl Ludwig was next in line to the throne, but the ageing brother of the emperor immediately renounced his own claim in favour of his son, and in any case he died in 1896. Franz Ferdinand then, who, up to this point, had expected to live the life of a wealthy and privileged, but a relatively obscure Austrian aristocrat, suddenly found himself destined to rule Europe's oldest great power. It was not a prospect that seems to have particularly pleased him. Still, he did his duty. He rose rapidly in military rank, becoming a Major General at the age of 31, and eventually being promoted to Inspector General of all the Austro-Hungarian armed forces, a position which meant that, had he lived to serve in the First World War, he probably would have commanded the Empire's army in the field. Franz Ferdinand had two great passions in life. One was for hunting. His fondness for blood sports was considered excessive even by the standards of the time, and his castle in what is now the Czech Republic is filled with 100,000 animal trophies. The other great passion was his family. As the heir to the Austrian throne, it was assumed that Franz Ferdinand would marry a Catholic princess of royal blood. To be officially eligible to marry a member of the imperial house of Habsburg, you had to be a member of one of the reigning or formerly reigning dynasties of Europe. One such group of eligible princesses were the 8 daughters of Archduke Friedrich, Duke of Teshon. And when Franz Ferdinand began regularly visiting their family home in the 1890s, it was assumed by Viennese society, and the girls' parents themselves, that he was shortly going to propose marriage to one of them. Imagine their horror then, and that of the emperor himself, when Franz revealed that the real object of his affection in the Teshon household was actually one of the Archduchess's ladies-in-waiting, Countess Sophie Chotek. Sophie was hardly a commoner. Her family could trace their line of nobility back to the 14th century, but she did not rank nearly high enough to satisfy imperial protocol. Emperor Franz Joseph ordered his nephew not to marry Sophie. He refused. The row went on for several years, until, in 1899, the emperor finally gave in, but only on condition that the marriage be morganatic. That is, Franz Ferdinand's children would not be allowed to inherit the Habsburg throne. Franz Ferdinand accepted this. Relations between the two men never recovered, however. It infuriated Franz Ferdinand that Viennese protocol forbade Sophie from sharing his rank, title, precedence, or privileges. She was not normally allowed to sit or appear in public beside him. One of the reasons he may have gone to Sarajevo on that fateful day in June 1914 was that he was appearing in his capacity as Army Inspector General rather than as imperial heir, and so Sophie, for once, would be allowed to accompany him in his motorcade. Franz Ferdinand's political views, especially his views about the future of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, are still something of a mystery. Although before and after his death he was often described as a reformer and a modernizer, in many ways he was a highly conservative figure. He was a passionate Roman Catholic and a staunch believer in the divine right of kings and emperors. For those reasons, he detested the Italian state which had been created in the 1860s and would have liked to have seen it carved up, with Austria reacquiring the territory in northern Italy it had lost and the Vatican returning to prominence in central Italy. He also believed in the so-called Holy Alliance of the two Kaisers and the Tsar, that is, between Germany, Austria-Hungary and Russia, which had existed for certain periods in the 1800s. Above all, Franz Ferdinand loathed the Hungarians, and he greatly resented the power-sharing agreement which Hungary had been able to foist on the empire in 1867. He believed that Hungarian meddling had played a direct part in the decline of the empire's power and authority, and he was particularly determined to introduce constitutional reforms at Hungary's expense once he became emperor. For their part, the Hungarians detested Franz Ferdinand, and many of them openly rejoiced at the news of his death in June 1914. Exactly what sort of future empire Franz Ferdinand had in mind is unclear. One possibility was a model called trialism, in which the southern Slavs would have been elevated to the same status within the empire as the Austrians and the Hungarians, with a third imperial capital being created in Zagreb in Croatia, alongside Vienna and Budapest. Another was a federal United States of Austria, in which overall central power would have been reasserted by Vienna, but many domestic responsibilities of government would have been handed over to the various ethnic minorities of the empire. Franz Ferdinand wanted to grant more power to the Slavs, not because he had any particular love for the Serbians — he disliked them as much as any Habsburg — but precisely because he thought that by co-opting the Yugoslav idea, he would make it more difficult for the government in Belgrade to stir up nationalist resentment amongst the Serbian population living in Bosnia-Herzegovina. In other words, Franz Ferdinand wanted to undercut advocates of Greater Serbia by offering reforms and moderation of his own, something that frightened ultranationalists in Belgrade. This is what Gavrilo Princip was getting at when he was asked at his trial why he had chosen to kill Franz Ferdinand. He was planning, Princip said, to introduce certain reforms which, you understand, would have been harmful to us. What made Franz Ferdinand dangerous was not that he was hostile to Slavic aspirations for greater political autonomy, but that he was in favour of them. But this may have been an after-the-fact rationalisation by Princip anyway, because in June 1914 he probably knew very little about Franz Ferdinand's political ideas. Indeed, the original plan of the conspirators had been to assassinate the governor of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Oskar Petoriak, a much better-known man amongst local Serbs. Franz Ferdinand was simply a target of opportunity that arose when news broke that he would be visiting Sarajevo. Killing the heir to the imperial throne would make far more news than the murder of some provincial governor. Franz Ferdinand was probably chosen to die simply because he was a living symbol of Austria, not because of anything he personally did or did not believe in. In killing him, though, the assassins would bring catastrophe onto their own people. Franz Ferdinand was not by nature a pacifist by any means, but in 1914 he thought the state of Austro-Hungary's internal politics was far too volatile to contemplate war. He counselled peace with Serbia and blocked numerous attempts by the Austrian Army Chief of Staff, Conrad, to inaugurate a preemptive war. With his death, the hawks in Vienna finally had their chance. We'll look at the circumstances of Franz Ferdinand's death next time, and consider a little who knew what about the plot and why they chose to encourage it, or, at the very least, failed to prevent it. See you then.